This is my very first kind of interview on the channel, and I wanted to introduce you to my good friend Kim, who's also happens to be my coach. I've known Kim for a really long time. I actually went back and checked my DMs right now. We first started talking in October of 2020, so it's actually been a pretty long time now. And I know for a fact that I've been working with her as a coach for over a year. Kim is really unique because, I've studied a lot of trading content and as it relates to psychology, books, interviews, things like that. And I feel like Kim has a totally different brand. I originally met her, or at least I got an introduction to her through the Steady Trade podcast, where immediately just knew like I want to talk to Kim because she was started talking about the hero's journey and how that relates to kind of like her view on coaching and things like that. And that really resonated with me. So I feel like she really would understand kind of the things that I really wanted to work on moving forward as a trader. Kim has done so many different things. Like she wears a lot of hats. She does interviews. She has her own podcast. She's a podcast host. She's an author and she's even talked to like literally celebrities like Michael Martin. I mean, he's probably the least of this list, but still like an all-star in his own right. I look up to him. Matthew McConaughey like on our channel. I can't believe that one. And Bill Ackman, who's we all know him as trader. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that Kim is really authentic. Before working with her, I tried to talk with her and just see what she's about and make sure that she was congruent with what she said. And having done a trial with her, I just stuck with it ever since because I just feel like she's never given me a reason to doubt her. She lives her process, and I just like that. She comes from a totally different background where she's lived a lot of her life from New York, dealt with a lot of the high life, and now resides in Hawaii. She didn't always start out the way that she was. She kind of grew into it, and so I hope that her authenticity can come across the way that it did for me, for you guys, if you don't know. And so welcome, Kim.
Thank you, Brian, so much. And for such a kind, heartfelt intro. I'm so blown away at the date of that DM. That is a long time, Brian. Thank you. That was a very generous intro. Thank you.
Sure. So a lot of times people ask me, you have a coach, especially my family and friends. And I'm like, yeah, I have a coach. And then they ask me, what is it for? And a lot of times like I don't have like a succinct answer for them because it's a lot of things, right? So I was wondering, how would you explain coaching in your own words? Like what do you feel that is?
I think I'll describe it from the perspective of what happened when I hired a coach for the first time. I had therapy in my life. In fact, I had hired, that's strong of a word, but my mother hired for me a therapist at my request when I was about 10. So I had a familiarity with doing work on yourself or personal development. And when I was introduced to the coach that I hired and ultimately followed in her footsteps to get certified as a coach with this CTI model, when I first started to talk to her about hiring her, the way she described coaching sounded like 180 degrees different than therapy. And that was what really intrigued me. So I think it's a long answer to your question, but for me, coaching holds the client, at least the style of coaching I practice, holds the client naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. That participant is not broken, that they actually have their own solutions within them, and that coaching asks perhaps the powerful questions that opens them up to their own answers, as opposed to coming in as though the coach is the expert. Whereas in psychology or psychiatry, it's like the doctor is the expert, not the patient. And this resonated with me right out of the gate tremendously. And I thought, wow, that I could get on board with to do for other people, never mind, mostly because of what it did for me personally.
Yeah, I remember that one of the first conversations we ever had was, you're like, Brian, this is not therapy. This is coaching. You're good. I'm not trying to fix you or anything like that. And that was really interesting for me. And I felt like your approach was so unique, but also I was so skeptical because, to be honest, I felt like there has to be something outside of me, something I don't know, and that what you were saying, I felt like it was not realistic. However, just from practicing it, I realized the value in it. And I feel like I have not heard anybody speak to this personally. I mean, I'm not searching for those answers, but
Yeah.
it's just completely different than, let's say, some of the well-known psychologists in the field. It's not really anything to do with that. It's more of a intuitive thing, and that you just guided me through. So like, I was wondering, because there's so much kind of self-help content out there, there's a lot of psychology and books and things like that. How come people tend to fail at that? And why do you think that, like, there's a value in coaching rather than someone kind of just being self-taught and just absorbing the content on their own?
I think absorbing content on your own is incredibly important, and that can't not happen. However, I do think there's a benefit for the journey of life, never mind the journey of trading, to have a person who's got your back, who holds you accountable, and who encourages you to look at the hard truths about the way you're operating without judgment. That too is a big piece of coaching, and that also is what makes it so unique. I hold all my clients, and now through many years of practice, strive, I don't always succeed, to hold myself this way from a place of neutrality, from a place of curiosity. So when you are in the middle of a challenge and you have somebody who is asking questions from a place of neutrality without maybe ready to make you feel crappy because of whatever's going on within you, that lends itself to people being able to see how they might be stopping themselves. But if you feel like you're going to be made to feel ashamed for how you're stopping yourself, I think we're just built and designed to keep that hidden from ourselves and from anybody else. So I think the key is like, how do you begin, even if you're not going to hire a coach, if you're going to want to become self-reflective, which I think is a no-brainer for any trader, you have to know how you tick. But could you begin to notice how you tick from the place of neutrality, from a place of non-judgment, and see if that doesn't give you a spaciousness to be with perhaps the more uncomfortable sides of yourself that you would rather not be there.
Yeah, so I completely understand where you're coming from because I've worked with you. Mm-hmm. And I feel like a lot of people will hear it and they won't, like, they might understand intellectually, but maybe not understand like what actually that means.
Yeah.
So because I kind of know some of the things that you work on, I was wondering if you could expand upon that just to give people a little more practical sense of like what that is. So if you want to start with neutrality, that's great. Otherwise, I want to talk about the gremlins for sure. And I want to talk about needs. So I feel like those are two important parts of your approach, as well as just
perfect
how the body interacts. So I'll let you pick which one resonates right now.
Which of those two you want to speak about first?
Whichever. Well, I'll just direct it then. So, what is neutrality? Like, Can you explain that
Sure.
to someone who's like a complete skeptic?
Yeah. Well, I think we have a tendency, our culture, and we as individuals have been kind of brought up, perhaps by our family of origin, perhaps by religion, perhaps by just the culture, that men and women have a kind of a cultural expectation laid on them early, right? We're not going to get into, genders beyond male and female, just to keep it simple for this conversation. But the bottom line is each of us have an expectation that kind of gets culturally indoctrinated to us, right? What's expected of us, how we're supposed to show up. And so for anybody who doesn't show up within that very limited perspective, one can start to feel bad about oneself. Well, what's wrong with me that I'm not XYZ? If I'm speaking, specifically to traders easily could come into this world and start comparing themselves to other traders, but I'm not where he is or she is, and I should be here when I'm only there. And so whenever that begins to be the perspective, we start to go into judgment. We start to have a judgment about ourselves. We start to have a judgment about where we should be. We start to compare ourselves. All of those potentially change if we approach it from a place of, oh, this is where I am, without making yourself wrong, that you're not at the level of Brian Lee, let's say, for example, right? If you start comparing yourself to people who, for whatever reason, are further along than where you are, if you make yourself feel bad about that, you potentially limit the gas in your tank to go that distance. And so what I ask clients to do at the start of their coaching is, are you willing to learn how to sit without that self-judgment, at least to begin to get more comfortable with those things about yourself that are perhaps the shadow side of you, the parts of you that are not what you want to, brag about, so to speak. So that, to me, it's neutrality, and the opposite of neutrality would be judgment.
Yeah. So one of the first things you said, I wanted to circle back to because I think it's really important, is this idea of this kind of self-judgment or expectation. And I mean, I'm not a female, obviously, but as a male, I understand that culturally, for the most part, we don't want to share our emotion. We want to kind of hold it in, not because we view it as weakness.
Yes.
But I feel that through working with you, I've come to understand that whatever you kind of don't express just kind of stays within you and can be somewhat, I mean, it can be very toxic as well, just for your own well-being. And you may not even really notice it. You might get used to this kind of buildup of emotion. Like, it doesn't necessarily go away. It just stays there with you.
That's it.
So I think it's interesting because nowadays, where I may have viewed that as a weakness, today I kind of view guys who hold it all in, don't express it, and just generally are pretty repressed about their emotion. I view that as a pained person, and that someone who would benefit tremendously from the non-judgment, the neutrality, and just how liberating that can be. Because there are times within our coaching where, like, I will just close my eyes and focus on kind of like what is going on in my body, like what's been built up over the years, and it will just make me cry. It just out of nowhere, out of the blue. And as somebody who's very intellectually focused, I had no way to kind of reconcile with like the fact that would even happen. That doesn't make any sense. And the only conclusion I inevitably had to come to is that the body is also has its own intelligence, and to completely ignore that aspect of your well-being can have a negative impact also on just the way you live your life with your trading. And it is every bit as important as the focus that you have with your intelligence and your knowledge. So like, how do you I haven't heard you bring this up necessarily with a lot of the content you put out.
Yeah.
So is there a way that you can help people understand that phenomena that I described, just my own experience?
Yeah, and let me just start by saying what a beautiful description you just gave it, that the body does have its own intelligence. And I feel, especially for traders, tuning into that intelligence, which basically is from like your neck down, is a crime, because every great trader, and even those who speak about the importance of the energy of the market, like that, picking up on those nuances, and not so, sometimes they're not nuances, sometimes it's like screaming loud at the top of its lungs with the energy of the market. If you are cut off from that intelligence, you are missing so many pieces of information. It's like, why wouldn't you want to utilize all the gifts that you come with? It's like, no, I can only use my intellect. Why would you do that to yourself? If anybody's ever walked into a room there where there has been an argument and the people aren't there anymore, and there's no yelling, you didn't hear it, but you walk into that room and you can feel it. There's a phrase that says, I walked in the room and I could cut it with a knife, the energy in that room. That is that intelligence of energy. We are just energetic beings. Yes, we're intellectual, but there is a whole force field of energy, of spiritual intelligence, that I feel too many traders are disconnected to, or they have it, but it's unharnessed. They get it sometimes. It tells them which way to go, again, based on a lot of intellectual hard work, but there's a knowing, and sometimes it's on and sometimes it's off. And I find the traders that are really able to go the distance are the ones who are able to learn how to harness it, how to get in tune to it. But how can you be in tune to that if you're disconnected from your own emotional body, the body's intelligence?
So, I mean, people who know me know that I'm a really systematic trader, so I can kind of bypass a lot of the emotions and things like that, and that is it's a good defense against the market, but it's not to say that I still don't experience those feelings. And it can even be circling back to what you meant about just comparing yourself with other people. So for example, I think a lot of people, we consume content, we consume social media, and at times you can come across something that absolutely just triggers something within you that makes you upset, jealous, emotional, things like that. In the past, I've had to just kind of ignore it and try to let that pass. But the interesting thing about the work that Kim's taught me is that there are really practical methods of just letting this go. And so part of that process for me now is, if I get upset, I just kind of take a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and I try to just sit with that and just kind of sense, like, where am I feeling this discomfort? And the interesting thing is that that feeling eventually dissipates in a much shorter amount of time than it takes for you to just kind of completely ignore it, and then eventually it will still kind of be with you and just generally annoy you. So like that's one of the really important aspects to this work, where you can kind of let go of these feelings that are inhibiting your ability to perform. Yes. And it's really interesting, just because, like, I remember there was a little anecdote that Kim shared on one of her podcasts about like a gazelle or something in Africa, and how that might relate, to our human experience. So can you share that anecdote?
Well, this is an anecdote I learned from Peter Levine's book called Waking the Tiger. And that was one of the first books that I read that really helped me deal with some unprocessed trauma that I had gone through. That book talks about that mankind, human beings, we have not been ever taught how to be with hard to be with feelings. But the story is an example of if a gazelle is being chased by a lion and it escapes, before it will return back to the herd, its herd, it will go and tremor and tremble out all of the fear that it, of course, was coursing through its vein to try to escape the lion. And because animals do that, because they process somatically in the body that trauma and shake it out, so to speak, when they finish that process, they don't carry trauma. They go back to the herd and it's over. Now, animals are up against life and death situations, sometimes multiple times a day, and yet they don't have trauma. That is what Levine says is why. And so his philosophy and his approach and his own journey himself, he believes that to process our hard to be with feelings is key for us to have freedom. And having done his work personally for my own journey, I can absolutely attest to the power of that. Now, and another teacher is Raphael Kushner, who taught me emotional connection. And similar to Levine and Raphael's approaches are somewhat different, but they both are in the same kind of school of thought of the somatic. And we have teachers out there today too who are advocating this. Certainly Gabor Mate talks about this, and Mark Wollman, Diane Poole-Heller, a lot of different teachers out there advocate this. I know for me personally, I had massive transformation for myself when I learned how to practice this. And I'm going to quote Raphael here. He has a great quote, and he says to that basically it's simple, but it's not easy. And that this work takes some time. Like it takes more than a minute to do. And it's unpleasant. Like, you get to the end of a long day. The last thing you want to do is go and be with some hard to be with feelings, maybe. But if you don't, it gets carried over and it lives in the body.
Yeah. And just because it's kind of funny, it's like, as traders, we are literally being traumatized every single day because we're experiencing the most extreme emotions.
Correct.
With the market, with our own disappointment with ourselves.
Correct.
With social media and all the different people kind of touting, and that can be really a lot to take in. And in fact, like that can really fester within you. And I feel like it's something that Raphael Kushner is definitely, he needs to be attributed to, so it's good that you brought it up. I wanted to like go a little bit deeper into the idea of the process and how, people, if you can explain how people, they tend to run away from these feelings and just not experiencing them. Whereas like, if you literally just take the time, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time to experience a little bit of it, then how much simpler that can make your life in a sense.
Exactly. And I will do that. I just want to add one thing on to what you're saying about the trauma that a trader goes through every day. The other thing, especially for the male traders that are listening, your testosterone levels are impacted by those losses as well. And because of that cultural expectation of men being the, succeeding, like business for men is so directly, succeeding in business is so directly attributable to their testosterone levels. So if you are having loss after loss, you are going to absolutely have your perspective change, not necessarily seeing what's there because of the hormonal imbalances that you're going through in the midst of that trauma. And that's spoken about at great length. In fact, there was scientific studies done of a trading floor by Coates. His book is The Hour Between Dog and Wolf, where they checked that they could predict, in fact, a trader's success based on his testosterone levels in the morning. And if they were too low, they knew he probably wasn't going to have a successful trading day.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So the point is, like, your levels of emotional well-being are of critical importance. And if you don't learn how to be with the hard to be with feelings, then, and in fact, there's in that Hour Between Dog and Wolf, Coates talks about the traders who were able to keep their heart rates within a very small range, regardless of whether they won or they lost, are the traders who have the best track record, because they aren't being lifted up and then crashing down on the shores. But that takes practice. And those usually were more senior traders who'd been at it for a while, lived with a lot of volatility. But if we go back to that question that you were posing right before, I think part of the reason most people would, let's say, like even me, like I found discomfort in having to be with these hard to be with feelings. Why? Because we haven't really been encouraged, again, by this culture and by the kind of instant gratification that everything is sort of at our fingertips. We don't have a lot of stomach for the emotional discomfort of surfing our feelings. That's the best term for it, because when you have hard to be with feelings, you need to surf them all the way into shore. And, you know, I always, you know, love, I've done surfing. I haven't done a lot of surfing. I certainly haven't done big wave surfing, but I've taken surf lessons. I actually almost drowned once during my girls' camp, surfing camp, because we lost our boards. A big incoming storm was coming earlier than they thought. And I can remember thinking like, wow, this is just like that emotional practice that I'm practicing. Like, you think you're going to die. Like, when you really learn how to practice this and you let yourself lean into the harder to be with feelings, your heart rate starts up. You start to sweat. Your eyes dilate. You sometimes are completely back in that hard to be with emotion. Maybe it's a bad trait that still haunts you. Maybe it's a fight with somebody that matters to you. You can easily put yourself back into that experience, and then to surf it all the way through takes a level of discipline. So usually what I'll say to clients is, when they're beginning to practice this, you go as fast as the slowest part of you can go. And it takes repetition. And if I recall correctly, like, you know, you probably were not thrilled with the idea either in the beginning. Like, no. Nobody's thrilled with this idea. It's like, I don't want to do this, Kim. I want to move on.
It's because it's kind of unbelievable. Like, it doesn't make any sense. At least, you know, because I don't want to lose anyone, because I know how traders are. I know traders, they're very practical. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to doubt. The only reason why, like, I feel like this would be an interesting interview in general is because, like, I am that skeptical person. I am, like, not in tune with my body whatsoever, or I have not been up to this point. And it does make a difference. It has changed, like, a lot of the ways I deal with stress, and it helps generally with staying a little bit more calm. And not that I had, like, a big problem with that, but I think that, like you said, somatically, it's not like it's going anywhere.
Right.
And I would love to give people kind of like a example of this practice, but I think that, you know, it's not really appropriate for podcasts in general. Yes. So I will just kind of like post a couple of links to your podcast where you talk about more in depth, so people can go into that. Sure. I just want to hit on some other, like, practical things that people can kind of lean into here. So, like, let's move on towards the needs. I think this is a really important part, and I want to preface it by just saying, like, when we're showing up to the market and we feel like all these emotions, such as like a FOMO, we feel upset with ourselves, or like almost even addicted, you know, there are certain reasons for this, which can be explained actually, like, pretty reasonably. So can you go into the needs and, like, what that actually means?
Yeah, I think a great vignette is I had done like a speed coaching session with a woman once who was kind of an outdoor adventurer. She just, loved to climb mountains and do parachuting and just like really kind of high adrenaline adventures. And because of the pandemic, that was not happening. So I didn't know this when she first came to the conversation, but she was taking way too much risk in her trading account. And she was like, I don't know what's going on. This is so not me. Why am I doing this? And I started to ask her some questions. And that's when it came out that she, had been this kind of weekend warrior and hadn't been able to do that. And as soon as I was able to hear that, I was like, well, you're trying to get your need for adventure met in these trades that you're taking way too much beyond what your normal risk, is. And she was like, it was just one of those moments where she was like, is it just that? Like, could it be that simple? And that moment, I think she just was like, it's this simple. Like she asked the question and answered it at the same time. And I was like, and we still were in the midst of the pandemic. So she wasn't in a position. I said, but find a way to get that need for adventure met so that you're not getting it met in your trading account. So there is a collection of needs, which I'm happy to share with anyone, called Universal Needs List. It was created by Marshall Rosenberg. He was the creator of a language called Nonviolent Communication, NVC for short. In it, he identifies basic universal needs. Every single one of us have a handful of these needs, and among them are non-negotiables. So for this particular woman, one of her non-negotiables was adventure. And if you aren't, one of the things that's fabulous about this list, and I'll just suggest to people now who do decide to get it, the first thing I say to clients when they get that list is identify what needs you are currently not getting met. And I can speak to a few that I would say most traders don't get met. They often don't have a community as robust as they'd like to. There's a lot of solitude in trading. They don't get their need for freedom really met because they're kind of locked into their desk during market hours. They don't often get the need for security met unless they have been able to get themselves to a certain level. There's a whole bunch of needs that I would say for every trader, before you go into your trading that day, you want to identify, am I attempting to get my needs met by trading? Because that is not where you should be getting your needs met. You should be getting them met elsewhere. Because if you try to get your needs met in trading, then that means you potentially are not going to be able to see clearly the actions you're taking. You're having an unconscious need that's seeking its completion through your trade. And that could become costly, never mind dangerous.
It certainly is. And I mean, like, I think a lot of people, they're going to think about it where they're still on their journey and they feel like they might not be able to like fully appreciate the needs and everything like that. But it does play a factor into your decision making, because even there are days where like, for a fact you shouldn't be trading, or that the market's not really your type of environment. And because like one need that people have is they want to they want to feel productive, so they come to the market and they just bleed their account away because there's no other way for them to get that need met, and this is like their main way to do so. So like there are a lot of applications for understanding like what are things that you really value, or what are things that you're not taking care of. And I find that it does make a big difference when, like, for example, if I take a little trip on a vacation just for a day or two, how when I don't have to worry about like all these things, and I feel completely at ease, like when I come back into my trading, I'm thinking a lot more clearly, and I have a better performance even just outside of trading, with just like how I'm going to review how much work I can put into it, I find that it can be really tiring to just go with trading, because like it's one of those things where it can fulfill a lot of things that you need in general, just because like let's say you have a green day, you know, you made money, you're productive, you spend your time well, you know, you're working towards something, and it is exciting, you know, you have that adrenaline rush and everything like that. But yeah, the needs are, it's something that I think people can really benefit from if they just like if we can find this list for them or give them this list.
Sure.
It's not, it's a lot. Yeah.
And the other thing too about needs that are so important is when we don't have our basic needs met, we're going to have unpleasant feelings like anger, sadness, grief, apathy. Apathy is a real situation, right? That's a feeling where you just feel apathetic and you don't want to do anything. So when we don't have needs met, like rest, like sleep, like nutrition, like sex, I mean, there's all these human needs. And if they're not being met, we're going to have hard to be with feelings. And those hard to be with feelings, if you take those hard to be with feelings, and that's what you're constantly going into the market with, depression, anger, frustration, how can that not impact how you trade? However, if you get your needs met, then these are the feelings you have: ease, peace, joy, equanimity. Like those are the feelings that you would want to step into the world's most competitive game. How much better will you do if you're coming from a place of equanimity? But if you're coming from depression or frustration or anger, we all know that when those feelings are coursing through us, we don't always make the best decisions for ourselves, never mind for our trading account. So it's beginning to realize, you know, look, I love to live in my mind too, but even if you have an incredible intellect, we have to know that we are not just intellectual beings. We are human beings. And that means that we have a kaleidoscope of other things that inform our being optimal. And that optimal level is it's a non-negotiable when it comes to trading. If you are not operating out of a place of being at your optimal best, you go in with so much potential damage. And that's ultimately what this conversation is all about. I want everybody to realize getting themselves to a place of being at their optimal level is perhaps more within reach with the right tools than not.
Yeah. And without sounding too like out there, it really is just about the awareness of it. So, like it's not like I'm aware of it, but it's not like I'm doing everything perfectly either. It's something you have to work at. So it's just like just knowing that there is something missing can make a difference, so that you can be like, oh, that's weird. I feel like I have to work right now. Or like
Yes.
One thing that could happen is or one example of a need being met outside the market, which has helped me, is when I just started working out, is that like, even if I'm in a drawdown, or even if I'm having like a hard stretch of time, if I'm still progressing in another aspect of my life, like building towards something, improving, that helps me feel more at ease as an individual, like to fight off that feeling of stagnation. And I think that, you know, if you just think about things where you can, like, what is something I can do outside of a market to kind of fulfill the same sort of quality, that will keep you more balanced in your trading. And again, like even as a systematic trader, I can bypass it quite a lot, but like at the end of the day, I still have to push the buttons. I still have to make those decisions, and I still make a lot of mistakes as well. And I'm like, what am I doing? Because I know that in trading in general, there's like so much hustle culture, and you want to believe that that is kind of the solution to everything. Like, okay, mentally reset every day, but can that have like can that have an effect, negative effect on your health, or just completely ignore your emotion
Never mind
ignore
on your
everything.
trading. Never mind on your trading. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a study. I'm grabbing my file here because I just read an amazing book called The Burnout Epidemic. How how we're paying for this chronic stress. But our productivity. This Stanford University economics professor John Pencaval discovered that productivity per hour declines sharply when a person works more than 50 hours a week. So after 55 hours, productivity drops so significantly that there's no value in putting in any more hours. If someone works 70 hours per week, they are just as productive as a person who put in 55 hours.
Yeah. I can tell that's true just because like it's similar to just the Pareto principles. Like 80% of the results come from 20% of the output. And like, you know, it's the same thing in the trading day. I think people know most of the volatility is within the first couple hours. Like you can stretch it out, yes, but what do you give up because of that? You give up time.
Right.
There are certain things you can kind of optimize in that way.
Yeah.
But in general, like I have taken more time off now than I have ever in my career. And I feel like I still didn't even scratch the surface of what I should have taken off, because there are literally stretches of days or if not weeks where I know that had I not traded, I would have been way better off in terms of reducing drawdowns or just maintaining profits. And it's pretty obvious, at least to me, when kind of like the market is going my way or not, and the compulsion to be there all the time.
Yes.
That's like what someone would tell you if you're just getting that general advice about how to succeed as a trader. Just show up every day, push, grind, whatever. But
Yeah.
there is a kind of a balance to be struck there. I just feel like a lot of people maybe aren't there yet where this is like their number one concern. But if you are kind of in the trading game for the long term, like if you want to make this a career, it is something that you will have to learn. And this is when like the work that Kim shares is going to be a far more relevant for you to reach your optimal state, which is like the most important thing at a high level, because every single mistake you make will have a huge impact on you, like way more than when you're intermediate, because you have way more to lose. Even traders with long careers, they can you can have a huge winning streak or a great year, but like it only takes one trade to just really put you off balance, like literally. And I think we all know that feeling. And so like how to maintain a state of mind where you're performing at a high level is like, this is what this work is for.
Yeah, I've been recently using the phrase that, one person recently asked me, what is it you really do? And the short answer was, I redesign what high performance looks like and how it goes about, because that grind is why there is burnout, and it's not sustainable long term, and it's breaking the physical body down of people, never mind the emotional and the spiritual side of individuals. So I think if there's one thing I hope people walk away from this, as the roosters outside my window agree with me, is what does redesigning high performance look like for everybody listening? The grind can't take you to the level that you want to go to. It's just not going to be sustainable. So how do you redesign high performance to take into account that you are intellectually going to have requirements when you trade, but emotionally you're going to have requirements? How do you get those two in synchronization? That to me is the key for those at the top levels.
Yeah, you will notice that I'm speaking to the audience, that across many high performers, and especially in trading, this aspect to just like patience is one of the qualities that they really stress, like just way in the end of their career, where they're like, I need to hit quality over quantity. I need to be patient. And like for me, an optimal performance actually is trading less in general. That's what it looks like to me, is enjoying more time outside of the market. And ultimately, I think that's what we get into trading for to begin with anyway. We want to have that autonomy over our lives. And so like that grind method, it will work, but I can tell you like it is mostly unsustainable, because like if you ask me um within my journey how long I think I could keep this exact same routine up,
Yeah.
I would say I only have like less than 3 years, and I'm only I'm only 29 years old. You know, as someone who's looking to be a career trader, um, 3 years is not really going to cut it. So I am thinking about the long term, and some people are lucky enough to like learn about these concepts early on and adapt them. But like for me, the only way I kind of saw it to grow was just through pushing through no matter what. And I know for a fact that like when I go through just years worth of data, just days after days, the things I end up getting like punished on the most are just the days where I lose my discipline. And I think that comes from like actually just not getting enough rest, uh just feeling way too adamant about like showing up, and just even regardless of how I feel. And that has a negative relationship, has a negative impact on myself and my relationship outside of trading, even with my spouse. So like it's
Yep.
it's not a good thing. But I think that we kind of fool ourselves into thinking that like that's the way that needs to be. But I
For
think
sure.
there's a balance to be struck for sure
For
in
sure.
optimal performance.
And you know, I have no doubt that hard work is incredibly required in this world. It's there's nothing that I'm saying that denies that incredible dedication, work ethic, but there is sort of this cult of productivity that, you know, Celeste Headley really helped me see through her book called Do Nothing, which, you know, when I saw that title, I was like, oh my God, I can't even imagine it. But she let me see that this really, the Industrial Revolution is why today we have this cultural emphasis on the grind, grind, grind. And she talked about how that we all are worshiping at the altar of productivity, and what the cost of that is our lives, is our joys, is being able to see a sunset and be present to it. And, you know, that book just made me realize, you know, obviously I moved from New York City, where I was born and bred, never thought I'd live anywhere else. And now I live in Hawaii, and I feel like grace got me here because I too was a grind, grind, grind. And I still have to watch myself because of that New York juju, that I can do it even here. But being in Hawaii forces me to come back to center and be like, can I stop working now and go take a nice hike, go swim in the ocean? This place constantly forces me back to that centering, back to the anchoring of myself. And I just think traders need that. And if you guys can at a minimum be there for each other, to remind each other, like, what is all this hard work in service to? It's in service to undoubtedly financial freedom, but it's probably also in service to you being able to be a contribution to those you love. And you got to remember, though, that those people that love you, they're not going to like get to have your company and your love one day. They want it now. They want it at the end of your day. And if you're so exhausted and demoralized that you got nothing left in your tank to give to them, well, then just think that is what's constantly in front of them. And as far as I can tell, once we get past a certain level of financial well-being, our happiness really doesn't change. So that's something too that I think is really important, you know, for traders to look at, is what is their relationship to money? Because after a certain level of success, if you are still operating and yet you're not really feeling happy or satisfied deeply within, I would say, isn't that worth looking at? Because isn't that part of what we're here to do, is to experience joy and peace and equanimity? I think so.
Definitely. And I want to point out that like the hallmark of a great teacher, in my opinion, is somebody who repeats on the fundamentals, like the foundation of their kind of core concepts and like their beliefs and their wisdom. And because like it is really that simple. I think people, they try to add on so many layers towards that process of like the ideal way to transform themselves, but like there are things that you just have to go through, much like in trading. You have to get down your risk management, you have to get down, you have to put it into time and everything like that. And it's these are topics that I don't necessarily like love sharing, because I know it's one of those things where it's like it's easier for you to say than it is for me, because I'm on my way. But like this is something that I believe in wholeheartedly, is that like you read a book like one time, and if you read it the second time, depending on the place that you're at, you're going to get something different every time. And so by doing this interview, I want to give you kind of like a starting point, or at least an anchoring point, where if you do find yourself in the state of mind in the future, you know where to come back to, what resources are available to you. And it's something that I feel like will blow past a lot of people, to be quite honest, as it usually does. But it will be there for you. And I know like it's something that if you just keep in the back of your mind, like you're gonna think about it a lot, like when that time comes.
Yeah. And look, I think if I am speaking in any way that feels like it's just too far-fetched or too hard for you to reach or wrap your arms around, just look at your trading journal and look at the days that you had the big drawdowns and ask yourself, what was going on for you? Perhaps you just start keeping a new journal, or add an extra column to that trading journal and start to track what's going on for you emotionally, and see if you don't learn something about the consistency of your moods, the consistency of your drivers, what's driving you every day. If you start to track that over time up against what happens to your trading days, I think you're going to see certain patterns. Wouldn't it be, if you're, most traders are so diligent about tracking their data. Why not track the data of your emotional well-being along with it, and see if that doesn't give you input that you previously didn't have access to?
Yeah, that is very important, actually, because the most important information besides the statistics, when I go back and review, even a year back from now, is the notes I had in my journals, like for the week, for the month, for the day, where I'm like, what was happening at that time? Because you can start to see patterns, and that helps me actually understand a lot more about what went down versus like the actual raw data. Because like you have to know where you were at that point in time. And as much as we like to think that we'll just remember, we really don't. Like I have no idea that was the week that this certain event was happening for me. And like
that's right,
it makes a big difference when you go back and review.
Totally. And you're a human being. Like, who hasn't been cut off by somebody on the road, and then somebody calls you right after that? You're angry, you're mad, like all of a sudden your driving gets a little bit more, aggressive, because I can't believe that guy cut me off. Who does he think he is? If your driving has changed, do you really not think a fight with maybe your girlfriend in the morning, and then you go sit at your trading desk and you haven't maybe been with any of those emotions? You don't think that anger is going to show up in a trade desk? It impacts your driving. Of course it's going to impact your trading. So, I have something called a trader check-in for traders to ask themselves, what's going on for me right this moment before I'm about to start trading? What's happening for me? What's going on? Isn't it worth that 5 minutes or 3 minutes it may take for you to just do a check-in, try to find a way to come back to neutrality, come back to center before you start to risk your trading account?
Yeah, I have like a little notepad that I have every day, and I just write thoughts that come to mind, and then I'll just copy and paste them into my journal. So it's very simple,
Super.
and like it's very easy to do.
Yep.
Um, I want to move on to another topic, which is one of the most important topics, in my opinion, that I feel like we may not have enough time for, but I just want to touch on it, which is the gremlin. And
Yep.
you know, before Kim talks about it, because she has a certain way of saying it. It's basically like your inner voice. I think a lot of people can relate to this, where there's some sort of like antagonistic or unconscious kind of belief, or like kind of repeating uh, kind of like mantras that go on your mind, I guess, that what maybe for me, I'll just be vulnerable and share, is like you're not good enough, or like you gotta, if you want to succeed, you must show up no matter what happens in your life, things like that. And it's not something that I necessarily believe, but it almost becomes part of you, because you almost attribute that to the reason why you got where you got in life, when like it may not necessarily be true anymore for you. So like this is something that has helped a lot with like just my own understanding. So do you want to share about that, Kim?
Sure, sure. When I first was exposed to coaching, coactive coaching, the kind that I practice, we were we were told in our initial courses to get a book by Rick Hansen called Taming Your Gremlin. And so the inner gremlin has a couple of names, inner saboteur, and what else is it? Gremlin, inner saboteur, and I don't know, there's another
It's like a
one for.
devil on your shoulder, kind
Yeah, it's
of.
like
It could
totally.
be
Yep.
whatever, actually. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. And so basically that isn't actually your inner voice. It can sound and get collapsed with what we is our inner voice, but it's really very different. It's a very judgmental voice. So when I was talking earlier about how important it is to step into neutrality, it's hard for most people to do that about themselves, because their gremlin or inner saboteur is so, waiting with bated breath to find everything, prove that they are wrong about something. So what is taught is that this inner gremlin uses words like should, would, and could. And when you hear that, like you should work today, even if you're exhausted, or you left at 2 o'clock, you could have stayed till 4 and made all this money. When you hear those phrases, that's your inner saboteur or inner gremlin who's talking. In the beginning, what I ask people to do is just start to capture on a piece of paper, what are the catchphrases that you hear all day? I don't even say that they are necessarily from the gremlin, because again, I don't want people to have a judgment about it. But when people start to identify what those catchphrases are, and some people will even say, oh, these are what motivate me. And I'm like, really? Because when I look at those phrases, those would do the opposite of motivating me. Those would make me feel like shit. And make me feel like a loser, and make me feel like I'm not good enough. And then they're like, oh yeah, well, that's how I get motivated. And I'm like, isn't that fascinating? These phrases that an inner saboteur or an inner gremlin has is its attempt to protect you, is its attempt to keep you safe. However, as Rick Carson speaks about in that book, the gremlins want us to stay in the landscape that's familiar. And that landscape is very small, like the palm of my hand, that I'm going in a circle. It keeps us from the rest of the landscape that's available to us. And it is ultimately holding us back and sabotaging our growth. And it takes ultimately just a practice, like you even said earlier, of noticing what are those inner catchphrases, and the ones that are not coming from a place of encouragement are usually costing us in ways that most of us don't even realize.
So these are catchphrases, right? And when you say that they're not really you, like, what do you mean?
Well, they could be the phrases of certain people that were involved in your child rearing when you were younger. They could be phrases that you heard from caretakers or from teachers. They could be phrases that your parents used to scold you. They usually are phrases that we've heard for many, many years. And they are the phrases that now have become sort of like the default sentences in our head. And until we start to really notice them, it's hard for us to distinguish between our own inner true voice and those. They sound, we're like, well, they're the same, but they're not. And as you know, Taming Your Gremlin is the name of the book that helped me see my own inner gremlins. And that book, he gives you exercises to start to practice. And again, all of coaching, what does it come down to? Is self-awareness. Begin to notice, what is that self-talk? Is that self-talk make you feel crappy about yourself, make you feel ashamed, make you feel less than? That's your saboteur talking, not your true voice, because your true voice is going to treat you with empathy and compassion and, at a minimum, neutrality. Whereas the saboteur is going to make you feel pretty shitty about yourself all the time.
Definitely. So because we're mostly talking about negative ones, is there any such thing as like a positive?
Yes. Well, yes. Version? I mean, it's not that the saboteur is going to use, could be very sweet and kind. Like, it's okay to have another piece of cake. Let's say if somebody's on a diet, what you should have that second piece of cake. What's the big deal if you have that piece of cake? You deserve it. You worked so hard today. That sounds nice, sounds friendly, but what's its motive? To sabotage your attempt to stay in a healthier way of eating, right? So it's not always the tone. It's this sense of keeping you from that leveling up that you want to create for yourself.
Just being more true to yourself, more conscious. There's a trader I really look up to. Is probably the best trader I know.
Mm-hmm.
And literally every time we talk, we've never talked about trading. I don't even know what he does. All we talk about is that with somebody who has everything they want in the world, even living in a no income state, like literally keeping every single profit and being one of the most profitable traders I know, all he talks about is finding the true kind of person that he is. He's trying to find the authentic him, because he feels like that is ultimately going to give him the happiness that he wants, that he seeks. And I feel like he's done so much work towards that. And it's just like contrasting that. I've seen people who are successful by any means, very successful traders who are like deeply unhappy. And part of the difference I feel like between those two is that, like, on one hand, you have this trader who is seeking the true nature of themselves and just like really trying to chip away at it, not letting them be controlled by the subconscious. Whereas like a lot of these other traders, what I've seen is that there's just a lot of confusion about like, why am I doing this, or was it worth it? They have all the money in the world, but they don't know what to do with it. And so I see that as just like a clear indication of like the path for a sustainable success
Yeah.
versus the kind of like almost toxic success that people still ask themselves at the end of the day, like, why does this still hurt? Why is this still tiring me out? Versus like someone who's working closer towards just like being truly kind of happy.
Yeah. Well, I think because we've been sold to bill of goods that money can buy happiness. I mean, that's what our culture's taught us. And what we see on Instagram and all of social media is that, oh, well, these things, which ultimately is consumerism, will give you that peace of mind you seek. And what happens is, and this, to go back a little bit to the concept of the needs, most people are very in tune to what they want, but that is not the same as being in tune to what you need. And so what I say to people is if you find yourself with even all the things you want, right? The monetary ability to have all the things you want, but if you still don't have the needs that you have that live underneath those wants, then how could you be happy? You know, those that I have coached that do have an incredible amount of wealth, they have been able to, thanks to their money, get all the things they want. But when we speak, they're still not happy. And then they're in judgment at themselves for being, I should be happy. Look, I have all these wants met. And what I say to them is, but you can't be happy if you have your wants met, if you don't have your needs met. Do you even know what your needs are? And there was one gentleman who had run a company for years. He had retired and he didn't have his need for respect met anymore. And that was a need that, unless that's a human need, we all have a need to be respected, but he hadn't gotten that met in a long time. So, but he thought of himself as selfish, or what's wrong with me that I'm not happy? Well, because you have a human need for respect, you're not getting that met. How do you get that need met? So what I say is, when you get a want met, but not the need underneath it, then you're going to be hungry an hour later. It's like Chinese takeout, right? You get Chinese takeout, you eat it, and an hour later, every time I've ever had it, I'm still hungry because it didn't fully nourish me. It didn't fully satiate me. And so that is what I say to people. Identify what are the needs driving those wants. If you, let's just say, like, you know, the watches, right? Like, and the cars, like for traders, but what's underneath that? It's probably respect. It's probably adventure. It's probably like being part of a community of those who have it too. All of those are human. If you get those cars and those watches and you don't have that sense of community, or you don't have that sense of respect, then people will probably won't do as much for them as they thought it would. And that's, you know, what I'm always trying to do for myself personally. What is the need underneath the wants that I have? And that's, you know, a place that I think is worth looking at, because everybody has met somebody who has tremendous wealth, and yet they don't seem to have any equanimity or joy. To me, that's a person I feel really sad for, because I know that they don't have their basic needs met, and they don't know how to go about getting them met. And they're kind of trapped between a rock and a hard place.
That's really right. I feel like I notice that a lot more now. So just kind of to wrap this up, is there anything that you want to say to people who basically are just kind of like on their way, but don't necessarily feel like this is like in their wheelhouse? You know, I know that for a lot of people, it can be kind of jarring, you know, like for me, it's like people come to expect like, oh, Brian's going to share something that I can use right away. Yeah. Something I can use in my trading, like a system or something like that. You know, this is very different, but I want to stress, like, it is an important part of the work that I do on myself. And it's like, I've literally talk with Kim for over a year, like every 2 weeks, about these topics. And so while I know it's not something that people necessarily gravitate towards, I feel like it is important to share. Like, even someone like myself finds a lot of value in this work, and I believe that you will as well. So what can you say to those people, just to kind of wrap it up?
Yeah. I would say consider that you are an emotional being. Even if you are incredibly wise and incredibly intellectual, you are an emotional being. Do you want to be swimming upstream against that? Or do you want to learn how to flow with it as it moves through you? Don't fight the fact that you're an emotional being. Don't be in resistance to that. Embrace it and learn how to surf those waves that are inevitable for any human being. You don't want to be a robot. And if you pretend you are a robot, you are cutting yourself off and denying a lot of spaciousness that potentially could give you your edge. But you're going to have to become somebody who is a steward of that emotional side of yourself. And if you ignore it, it potentially has the upper hand. But if you become conscious to it, if you become connected to it, and you can watch yourself as an observer of these emotional waves that are inevitable, then you potentially have the ability to direct the when and the how, and for the period of time, as opposed to being at the mercy of it. What I say is that, do you want to be on the leash of it, or do you want to have it on a leash?
All right. And what is just like one thing people can take away right now and work on, or how can they work on it? Is it something that we talked about? What can they do today, no matter who they are, what they're doing?
Yeah, I think I probably want to send them, that trader check-in, because the trader check-in, I would say right now, make sure, if you don't have in your trading journal, make sure you have a place where you're checking your emotional temperature every day before you trade, and at the end of the trading day, do a check-in before and after, and track it and see how that does play a part in your successes and in your failures.
Got it. Yeah, that's great advice. That's something that, even the prop traders with like SMB, they stress a lot of times, writing all these things down. It's hard work, but honestly, even as meticulous as it is, it does actually have a lot of value looking back. And I feel like the best notes are the ones that put you back in the state of mind that you were in, so that you can really like analyze exactly what was going on in your life. So thank you, Kim, for being here. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I hope that, again, like, her authenticity came across the same way that it came across for me.
Thank you, Brian, so much for having me. It's a pleasure.